Hi everyone, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel and our Facebook group and our newsletter and our great sponsors, Abiativa Casa, Italy Rooting, and Phil Italy. And my guest today from Omaha is Sherry Kanger. So welcome, Sherry. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to share with you and enrich your collection of podcasts with stories of people who have Italian ancestry.
Oh, thanks for being here. And the Italians getting to Omaha. So when did your family arrive, and do you know why they came?
I do. I'm one of the lucky ones. I asked questions as a youth, so I do know some. But as you may well know, a lot of our stories have been suppressed, either by our families wanting to escape poverty or because it just wasn't something that was discussed in those days. I haven't quite figured that part out. However, I do know that there is one ancestor who I am particularly close to in terms of the story that she brings to Omaha. And the story is Lucia Shushilo. And Lucia was a young widow. She was 34 years old when she was made widow with three young girls. Two of them were close to marrying age. So it is my assumption that she came to America to make sure that those two girls, the older ones, would have a better life. In doing so, she came along with them. One went ahead of her, and then she came along with the second daughter. The third daughter, who stayed behind in Sicily, in Carlentini, Sicily, was raised by her mother. In other words, Lucia's the girls' grandmother. And that was Concetta. Concetta stayed behind. My great grandmother was Maria Puglisi, and she married Salvatore Ruma. Now, they were both of Carlentini's ancestry. I believe they were 8 years apart in age. So when Maria did arrive here in Omaha, Nebraska, she was set up by a Mrs. Ira. And apparently Mrs. Ira would set up a lot of these Carlentini's families based on her knowledge of the family's connections with each other back in Carlentini. So my great-great-grandmother came in 1913 with my great-grandmother, Maria. And the reason why I know this lineage is I was very close to my own grandparents. So the two ladies that I'm speaking of are the ascendants of my grandfather, Alfio Ruma. Maria married Salvatore. They had 9 children. Lucia lived with them in a 2-room, I believe, shotgun house in what is known as Little Italy, which is east of 13th Street and Martha in Omaha. And her parish church was the traditional Sicilian Little Italy neighborhood church. And at that time, it was named St. Philomena. Recently, it's been renamed St. Cabrini. And often I find myself calling it St. Philomena to this day. And even my grandparents always called it St. Philomena once the name was changed. My grandfather was baptized there. A lot of family history encompasses that parish. I know that story, but there's a lot more that comes with it.
That's really interesting that there was such a large community from this town in Sicily. So how did they get there? Why did they go to Omaha of all places?
Omaha was a hub for the Union Pacific Railroad. And just off the main station where people would come from New York as they came into Ellis Island, or if they came in from Louisiana, or in some cases, Canada, as they came to Omaha on train, they arrived at Union Station, which was just outside of Little Italy. So they immediately immigrated to that area. There was such a large influx between the late 1800s and the early 1900s that 10% of Omaha's population was Italian. But more significant to that, of that 10% of the population, 70% came from Carlentini. And I'm going to add another city in there, Lentini, because they were neighboring villages, or today communes. But there is probably a large population of people with ancestral lineage to Carlentini, an estimated 30 to 50,000 in number. Even, if they have, 5% Italian, it's likely that it's Carlentinese.
So did they mainly go there for the railroad or for mining or?
They did. They came for the railroad. As more and more people came, and as the railroad was established, the stockyards came next. My grandfather worked for the stockyards. His father, though, Salvatore, who came in the early 90s, he worked for the steel company that made the wheels for the Union Pacific Railroad. So there's the steel mill, there's the Union Pacific Railroad, there's the stockyards. There was also a need for women laborers to come and work for Skinner Factory. The macaroni factory was here in Omaha at that time as well. A lot of women who came in the early 1900s were seamstresses and people who cleaned houses and that sort of thing for other people in the community. So that's the prime reason for people to come to Omaha. And the amount of poverty that they were experiencing in Sicily was their desperate way to get to Omaha. There were two brothers in the late 1800s who became ferrymen, basically, for this straight line of our ancestors who came from Carlentini. And by word of mouth, they came. So eventually there were three enclaves of Italians in Omaha. One was the Carlentinis that established the Little Italy neighborhoods. Then in the northeast part of Omaha was the Lentini population. And then a little bit further west of Little Italy in the southeast part of town, was the Calabrese. And my grandmother was Calabrese. So my grandfather, 100% Sicilian, married a Calabrese, which they ran off and got married,
I was
actually.
going to say that was probably not the thing to do back then.
No, no. They both came from a family of 9 children. And at some point, they fell in love at the local movie theater. My grandfather was playing with my grandmother's hair behind and in the seats, and he was smitten for her. And it was a matter of a couple of years, but they ran off to Seneca, Kansas, and eloped
Wow, that's
in
something.
1948, I believe.
So now there was a macaroni factory in Omaha in the early 1900s?
It still exists, yes, but it is not the real large industry that it was, I believe, at that time. It's still a big company. Skinner Macaroni, if you look it up, it's still here, established in Omaha. It's been here for over 100 years now. But yeah, Skinner was in downtown Omaha.
And it's Skinner, like an American kind of name,
Oh,
not
yeah.
an Italian. That's funny.
No, no,
Did
it's,
they
I
did they
believe it's
start?
German. Yeah.
Yeah, that probably makes sense. Did they start because there was just a large Italian population there, and they decided they needed, macaroni?
That is a great question. As a matter of fact, I taught the kids, the grandkids of the original Skinner Macaroni family. I should have asked more questions back then, but it wasn't until I had been an established teacher that I learned that my grandmother actually worked there. So there wasn't quite that timing where I could have thought a little bit more about that to ask those questions. But I'm not sure. I should look into that a little bit more. Now you've got me, wanting to go down that rabbit hole and do a little research.
I was trying to, and somebody thought they might be able to put me in touch with them, but I couldn't. I trying to get in touch with somebody from the Ronzoni family in New York because that was the pasta we ate all the time, and it's the same thing. That's probably over 100 years old,
Sure.
and they sold it. I don't know, maybe 20 years ago or something like that. But I would love to get their story because that was the family business for you know 80, 90, 100 years or something like that. So you didn't call it pasta, right? Growing up, you called it
I did.
macaroni.
No, we call it pasta. We were
Did you?
pasta.
We were always macaroni.
I never heard of the macaroni until it was in a box as a teenager. And then my mom would always call it basta, which means stop. That was so confusing, but I think that was just, they didn't speak the language. My mom didn't grow up speaking it, but she did take lessons with me in 2019. As we were taking lessons together, word started to come to her. And I turned to her, kind of nudged my mom, and I said, Mom, I thought you said you didn't know Italian. She goes, Well, it's coming back to me. I'm like, so she did know.
So she knew it.
She did know at one point or another. And my grandfather and his siblings always spoke Sicilian around one another. anytime we had family reunions or get-togethers or any weddings, funerals, whatever, it was Sicilian. You could, and they didn't let anybody in. It was just the siblings that spoke the language.
I'm trying to learn. We have classes I've tried several times. I'm just not good with languages, but I'll get there. I'll get there eventually. But it's funny you mentioned that because, when we would have my mother's family she's from a family of 9. And so and I had 23 cousins. So whenever there was family, a wedding specifically, my Aunt Mary was the one who would hold the bag, right, to put the envelopes in. And they always called it boost. And I always boost more because they were from body and they chop everything off. And I always, in my mind, I always thought a boost like a helping thing. But it was when I'm starting to learn Italian, I saw busta means envelope. And I'm like, how stupid, of course. And my Aunt Mary would always say, she would never say something was expensive. She would always say dear, right? Like caro, and that too, the same thing. I said, oh, that's why she would call something dear because caro means, like expensive.
Yes, that is so true. There are some things that, over the years I can look back and say, well, that was unique to my family, or that, something that I could relate to being Italian. But, for example, my husband didn't understand. One instance I remember, I was 15 years old, dating my now husband, but my boyfriend at the time. And he comes to the house, and mom was making pasta with sauce. We don't call it gravy, but with the sauce. And it was a Sunday, and we're all getting ready. And my mom yelled out to all of us to go and get our spaghetti shirts on, which meant we changed our shirt because she didn't want us making a mess. And my boyfriend at the time just looked at the four of us kids walking through the living room, and he did not know what to think about that. He just thought that was the strangest thing, that we had to change our clothes to eat our dinner at that time, or lunch. But it's always been something that actually intrigued my husband as well. He loved the Italian culture. At one point, my grandfather even initiated him and said, I'm blessing you, Italian, because you're marrying my granddaughter. So he's always been just a part of the culture, and loves it as much as I do.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.co. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
Well, I used to love when my ex-wife she was an Italian, or we bring friends over to my grandmother's house, something like that, and they were just shocked by the amount of food, and especially like Christmas or Thanksgiving or something like that. You had to tell them, slow down. This is only the beginning.
This is so true. That is something that I learned from my mom. She wanted to entertain. She wanted to bring family together, and it was always a matter of food. That was the central idea, was to bring in food, and it wasn't just a little bit. You had to have choices, you had to have options, and you could never go to an event where there was just not enough food, at my mother's house. And that was something that I would notice going to other people's houses growing up, that they were lacking in. I thought, why don't you have more choices? But it was just something unique to my family, and my mom, made sure that she always followed the protocol for her family growing up. They did the same.
Well, we used to go to the beach with eggplant parmesan and sausage and peppers, and the kids on the next blanket were eating peanut butter and jelly.
Yes, yes, that is so true. That, one of the cultural traditions in our family was always to have the meatballs and the sauce and everything for Christmas. And that was another thing that just blew my husband away, was, why don't you do turkey or ham? And no, we do spaghetti on Christmas Day. That was our tradition. Was the
Well, we had
spaghetti.
everything. We had everything, and my uncle used to, and I mean, I could do it with the machine, but I wish I could do it. He had the big board with the long rolling pin thing, and he could roll out a thing of pasta like this, like that, and make raviolis by the dozen, like it was nothing. Like it was nothing.
Amazing. Yeah, and my grandfather made the sausage, and people would ask, "Oh, can I
Mm.
have your grandfather's sausage?" And I didn't know that was a thing, that you don't share recipes. And when I asked my grandfather if he would share the recipe with a friend of mine who had a restaurant, he really took offense to that. And I just didn't understand why he was so upset. But I thought it was a compliment. I said, "Grandpa, you could, somebody could market this for you and sell it at their restaurant." He says, "I'm not sharing my recipe with anybody for sausage." And I thought, why not?
Yeah, I had a friend in Chicago. Her father made this, and boy, it was such a good sausage. But I did get one recipe. My aunt and uncle worked at a bakery in Queens, in New York, and I I know the family that her grandfather owned them. And we were talking, and she said people still say it was the best pizza that they ever had. And I said, "Oh, of course, I remember it was so good." And so I asked for the recipe, and her cousin, her real cousin, said, "No, I promised Grandpa that nobody would ever get the recipe." And I said, "Oh," I said, that's too bad, because my uncle Frank Nicoletti used to make the pizza. And give me your phone number. So I give him my number, and he calls me up. "Uncle Frank, that's your uncle?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You could have the recipe." He said, "I loved your uncle. I know he made the pizza." And he said, "I had to adjust it a little bit, because you're not making, 100 of them." But so I was able to get the recipe from the bakery in Corona. So that
That
was
is
good. Yeah.
amazing.
Uh,
That is amazing. Having grown up Italian and with those traditions and culture, and even being, Roman Catholic, and that being something that was very important to me, and knowing where that came from. I remember asking my dad, "How long have we been Catholic?" And he says, "Well, my mother was Lutheran, and to marry my dad, she converted. But when I asked my grandmother, 'How long have we been Catholic?' she stopped short, looked at me, and said, 'We have always been Roman Catholic.'" And as a Catholic school teacher, that was a really powerful statement to me. I truly appreciated that gift at that moment. I didn't realize until then, and I was an adult, that that was a gift.
well, my cousin, she's, I guess, about 10 years older than me, roughly 8 or 10. And she married, her husband, Charlie, was Protestant. And they got married at the Catholic Church, but back then they couldn't get married at the altar. They had to get married before remember they used to have the altar rail,
Yeah,
right?
yes, I'm
They
with
had
old.
to get they had to get married there. They couldn't get married on the altar. Isn't
Wow.
that crazy?
That is interesting. But those traditions, of our faith are something that are important too, because they each have a reason for it. There's
Hmm.
different reasons, and there's a story behind all of those traditions as well. But as a Catholic school teacher too, I was teaching for 24 years. But I had a feeling around 2019 that something was kind of changing, and it wasn't something I had ever dreamed I would be doing, was not teaching. I always saw myself teaching until they wheeled me out when I was 80 years old, because there's no retirement plan with the Catholic schools. So people would ask me, when do you think you'll retire? And I was, retire, they'll have to wheel me out. I don't have retirement. This is not a short-term plan. But in 2019, there were some changes with administration, and that and curriculum and that sort of thing. And I had been in the same school for over 20 years. And in 2019, I could feel a new emotion that maybe it was time for me to move on. And then in 2020, we had the COVID shutdown. And in that same time period, my son came to the house with his wife, they were newlyweds, and announced that they were having a baby. And I just remember looking at my husband in April of 2020 and saying, "I'm quitting my job, you figure it out." And I had already started down this road of pursuing Sister City with Carlentini and Omaha at that time. And to back it up a little bit, I went to a high school that was about a mile from my house. Grandma and Grandpa's house was between my house and my high school. I never made it home. When school let out, I went to Grandma and Grandpa's house, ate dinner, and then Grandpa would take me home. And this went on for years. because I lived so close growing up to my grandparents and I was the oldest grandchild, I was very close to them. They were 40 years old when I was born. They were like my parents. Even at times when my mom didn't want to make a choice about anything or wanted me to understand the value of grandparents, she would say, "Well, call your grandma, see what she thinks," that for the final approval. So I was extremely close to my grandparents, and it was probably my junior year of high school where grandma gave me the key to the house. And this house was the statement, I'm in it right now. This house was the statement of success for a first generation immigrant with an 8th grade education who retired at age 54 because of all the B's he made, the bonuses, at the stockyards and all the investments he made with purchasing property as rentals over the years. So my grandfather retired at 54 and with an
Wow,
8th
that's
grade
great.
education bought a house in 1956, brand new home. He remembers bringing his parents to this house, which seemed eons away. And it was literally, I don't know, a 10-minute drive. It was, we live on 46th and Bancroft, and he grew up, which is straight east of here, on 12th. So it was only a matter of 30 blocks, but he was in West Omaha at that time. And the house had so much value to him just because of his where he came from. He came from a hardworking blue collar family. He was the firstborn immigrant here, and that meant a lot to him. And in 2011, I began asking questions about his grandmother, Lucia. And I said, "Well, why was her name Lucia, but her kid's name Puglisi? I don't understand that." He goes, "Well, I don't know. She was married." Well, there's a little bit of a backstory. She was made widow. Her husband was killed. I believe that she needed to get out of Sicily. She wanted to leave, probably because of that. I think there might have been something tied to that. I wish my cousin Nuccio was here to share the story and see what his take is on that. But I truly believe that was part of it. But I also believe that Lucia never wanted to separate her daughters, who were sisters. And she always wanted them to remain connected. And when she died in 1939 of cancer, her kids did remain connected. There were multiple visits back and forth. And there were a lot of occasions where my family sent money and boxes of sheets and linens and all kinds of wedding gowns, money to buy their first refrigerator in Carlentini, those kind of things. To the point where in the 80s, we had a cousin come here, and then my grandparents went back out there. And this went on, every 2 years, somebody from my grandfather's family, the siblings, would go out there. When my grandfather died in 2014, grandma died in 2006, grandpa died in 2014. When that sign went in the yard, and I was living in a 3,400 square foot home in a new subdivision at the time, I told my husband, I said, "I can't see that house going to a stranger." And I said, do you mind buying the house with me? And the first thought was to rent it out. And he said, "I'm not having 2 mortgages." And I said, "What if we buy grandpa's house and move?" And he said, "I'd love to. I loved your grandpa's house. Then we won't have high taxes in this new subdivision." And I said, "Okay." And we committed and we moved here. And from the moment I moved here, this house has been a gift. It is a tiny little house. I had to sell everything I owned just to get my necessities into this home. Going from 3,400 to 950 square foot was quite an adjustment. It was actually painful, I thought. But when I came here, I realized what's most important, and it's the family stories and those connections. And when I did arrive here, I had a question and I couldn't answer it. I could not remember where in the cemetery this great grandmother, Lucia, was buried. So I went to the Archdiocese Cemetery to ask for a plot map, and they couldn't find it in their computer system. And they asked when she died, and I recall the story. My grandfather told me that she would sit on her bed with him while she was dying and look out the window during the time of the Santa Lucia festival. Saint Lucy is the patron saint of Carlentini, and she has been venerated for over 400 years in Carlentini and just over 100 years here in Omaha. And it was a special time when the saint would, come by and the band would play and the people would follow and that sort of thing. So as the procession came by, he remembers looking out the window. So I'm thinking of this story at the archdiocese um, offices for, the cemetery. And I said, you know what? It must have been in August. I said, you're going to have to look in August. So she goes to the basement, pulls up these big books, and starts looking for the death year or the death date, because that's the only way she could find the plot of where she was located. It wasn't in the computer system. It was too long ago, and they hadn't put some of the data on their computer system at the time. And this is in 2000, I believe, 16 or 17 when I inquired. So they find it. She finds it. I have a picture of her pointing to it. I should have taken video at the time. And when she points to it, she goes, I can look for the plot map now. And she gives me the plot map. And then I recalled another story, and I'm looking at the picture my sister had sent me of the headstone, and there was a missing cameo from it. And on her headstone, the reason why we had to even look up the date was because there was a birth year and a death year, but no birth year and death date. So that's why the archdiocese needed that information of, when she died specifically. But as I'm recalling and looking at this photo and of the headstone without the cameo, I remembered that my grandfather was upset about that. He told me the story that he was upset that that was missing. So it happened sometime, within the 10 years, before grandpa passed away, that this cameo was missing, and he figured somebody in the cemetery ran it over with the tractor. It was gone. I happened to ask, do you have a lost and found? I mean, the story just came to my head that grandpa was always concerned that the cameo was missing. And the lady, her name was Leanne, and she says, as a matter of fact, we do. She turns around to a 5 steel cabinet drawer cabinet, pulls out a cookie tin, opens it up, and there are, I think, 5 or 6 cemeteries in Omaha that have thousands of bodies in them, people buried. Opens the lid. There's 3 cameos inside. She lays them out on the counter. One is a young soldier. One is like an older woman, did not look Italian to me. And the third one looked a bit like my sister. And so when I saw that, I took a photo of that, not really knowing or remembering what Lucia looked like. I sent that to my sister, took my plot map, and left. And when I sent it to my sister called me immediately, and she says, where did you find her? I said, find her. And she goes, that's our great-great-grandmother that came to Omaha. That's her cameo. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. And so I told her the story I just told you, and she goes, go back and get it, because I had left. And I said, I'm not ready to close. And she goes, I don't care. Go back and get it. And I was maybe 3 minutes away. So I hurried back, walked in. The cameos were still out. I looked at Leanne, and I laughed, and I said, I guess she belongs to me. When I brought her back home, I didn't bring her back to the cemetery right away. I brought her to the box behind me. That is my grandparents' remains. I put it on the box, and I told my grandpa, I said, is this what you were looking for? And I promise you that it was at that moment that I began to have this feeling that I needed to go to Carlentini. So in Carlentini, in 2017, Carlentini was calling me, and it was my 25th anniversary. So my husband and I went out there, had our marriage blessed in Mother Church, and it was such a special, special time for us. We were welcomed with open arms by all the family there. There was a huge party and celebration that was prepared for us that I wasn't expecting. And it just set the stage for me to understand that this connection has never stopped and that it must continue for the next generation. So when I came back, it was in 2018. I was part of the Santa Lucia Festival Committee at the time. I was the assistant secretary, and someone at one of the meetings just kind of hollered out, hey, in 2021 there's going to be a 400th anniversary celebration of the saint. And I don't know why I did this, but I stood up and said, I'll plan a trip. And people actually signed up for this trip, and into 2021 it was derailed because of COVID and some other things, but it did set something in motion that I didn't even know would transpire. And that was this pull I had to leave teaching, this desire I had to bring these 2 cultures together for that next generation. And what I did was it was the summer of 2019. I was watching the news with my husband. My husband was the deputy chief of police in Omaha at the time. So he knew our mayor rather well. And the mayor is on the news coming off of a plane because Omaha and France, Omaha Beach, were going to become sister cities. And I remember asking him, how does a beach become a sister city? And he says, I don't know. Why don't you contact the mayor's office and find out? And I went ahead and found the Omaha Sister City Association email and contacted them, set up a meeting. And within this informal meeting at a coffee shop in probably August or September of 2019, I was told that there wasn't enough support in Omaha for a Carlentini Omaha sister city. I'm thinking, that's strange. All this information I knew about my family and about the Italians in Omaha, and even my teaching experience. Every year I would have kids that were Italian, and most of them were from Carlentini just by their names. I was starting to piece things together over a course of time. And then this gal said, well, let's meet another day. So we met another day, and she said, I don't think there's any support in Carlentini. And I said, no, that's where you're wrong. I just came back from a trip in 2017. They know our stories. They want this relationship to remain connected because they missed their family when they left. Some people would come back and forth, but most of them left and stayed here and remained in the United States. And so, not knowing what to do at that point, but knowing that I had this trip being planned, a gal called me. I hadn't met her before. Her name was Carmelita de la Guardia, and Carmelita was a Carmelita Troya, was her maiden name. And Carmelita was an immigrant from Carlentini. She moved here to the United States when she was around 10 years old. And she happened to call me and say that her cousin was asking about this person who's planning this trip and wanted to know who I was. How do I get, my name is Sherry Kinger. How do I connect with Carlentini? So I told her a lot of what I just told you about my story and my family and all the names. And I told her the name, Lucia Shishula, and she says, we're related. And I said, how can you be so sure? And she said, we're all related. She said, but Shishilo is my family name. She goes, that was my mother's name, I think. Her mother's maiden name, I believe, is how that was, or her grandmother's name, something of that sort. As it turns out, they were related. And it doesn't go back too many generations to find that out. As Carmelita's a singer, and as she was telling me stories of singing and doing different events in Omaha, small venue events of sharing her family's story of immigration, it dawned on me. I threw it out there to her. I said, I've been trying to contact Omaha Sister City Association. Do you want to help me on this little adventure I'm taking on? And she said, I would love to. That's been my life's dream, to bring Carlentini and Omaha together. I'm like, wow, this is incredible. We met with Omaha Sister Cities people once again, had more of a little game plan, decided to sit on the idea for a little bit because we had scheduled a meeting with the Omaha Sister City people, and one of the gentlemen had his wife passed away. So he wasn't able to meet with us. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And in May of 2020, my tour guides, Rosella and Gianca from Sicily, had to pivot because their whole livelihood was in the balance of travel. They had to figure something out. So they did a live Facebook feed, a live stream, where they were interviewing this young lady from Carlentini, Sicily, who was going to be our travel guide for the trip. And I'm smiling the whole time. She's this bubbly little young thing named Eleonora Formica. And Eleonora is a travel guide, has been a travel guide for like 16 years at that time. And when the live stream was over, I contacted her on Messenger, told her who I was, how I connected to family in Carlentini, and she said that she went to school with my younger cousin, Laura Monaco, and that would be Nuccio's cousin as well. And so it was a spark between us three ladies that started from that moment, and it didn't let up. We became so ambitious. You have one person whose story is, my family immigrated here. You have one person who immigrated here as a youth, and then you have somebody in Carlentini. What was unique about Eleonora is her biso nono came to Omaha. She didn't know this either. She recently found it out that she was giving a tour in 2017, and when she greets her people, and this was in Siragusa, she says, "Hello, my name is Eleonora Formica. I'm from Carlentini Lentini, Sicily." And one of the gentlemen in her tour group said, I'm from Carlentini. And she says, how are you from Carlentini? You're from the United States. He says, well, I'm from Omaha, but my ancestral roots are in Carlentini. And she said, really? She goes, well, my great great grandfather father went to the United States, but he went to California. Well, she kind of thought about that a little bit more, went home, talked to her father, and asked, where did Biso Nono go? Guess where he went? Omaha. She had no idea. She says, that is the second time today I've heard that word, Omaha. So you've got this connection with her great grandfather coming to Omaha, getting all of his money from working on the railroad and going back to Sicily to buy an orchard and to build their, what she would call their fortune, which would be their, their, just their family earnings. And that's what helped their family build their home and, be successful there back in Carlentini. So our stories were each unique enough that we found each other, and then we continued to find more people that would help us with this journey. And October of 2020, the three of us girls formed Carlentini Omaha Association in Sicily. It's a recorded nonprofit. But over in the States, we needed a little bit more help. So I wrote the application for Sister City, had it submitted in December of 2020. So now a year has gone by. And in 2020, this application went to the mayor's office. My husband happened to be in the cabinet meeting for the mayor's office that particular day. And she was commenting that she didn't understand why another application for Sister City was coming in. She's the honorary president for Omaha Sister City Association. So when an application comes in, she can approve it, or she can just say, this is not something that we're interested in right now. So when the application came across her desk and she reads out loud, what is this Catania thing? Why are we pursuing another sister city when we haven't finished or completed the France transaction and agreement? And my husband said, that's not Catania, that's Carlentini. And she says, well, how do you know? And he said, that's my wife who submitted the application. And her response was, well, I like Italy. I'd like to travel to Italy. So at that moment, we knew that there was an interest. There was a city government interest that perhaps this could move forward. And with a little bit more help of two other people in Omaha here, Carmelita and I, or three other people, Carmelita and I formed a foundation called Sicula Italia Foundation. And over time, things changed in my family. For example, I had three more grandbabies born within a short period of time, and I was watching them because, remember from the beginning of our story, I informed you that I was staying home to watch these grandbabies, and that was my biggest goal, was to stay at home and be with these grandbabies. It was overwhelming, I must say, but it was a joy. And in the course of that time, there was a point where I felt like I needed to commit to the family and remove myself from the Sicula Italia Foundation formally and from the Omaha Sister City application process. I had been on their chair and part of the coordinating council from 2020 when the application was submitted to 2023 when I decided to step back for the sake of the family. And it was a pretty life-changing experience during those few years, but I still had this pull. And still being part of the Carlentini Omaha Association in Carlentini, Eleonora proposed that we work with students in Carlentini to bring them to Omaha. And in November of 2023, she threw the proposal my way and said, what do you think? Do you think we could bring some students from Carlentini to Omaha? And I taught 24 years, sixth graders. So that was my thought, was what about some junior high kids, bringing them to Omaha? And she went ahead and talked to the principal from Carlentini, and they wanted to pursue that. So by March of 2024, we were in pursuit of bringing students here and observing the classroom environment in Omaha's public school system. In order to get kids or adults into a building in this day and age, you basically have to sell your arm and leg. So I had to have everybody that was a translator, all the kids, all the adults, everybody had to come and make sure that they had all the right credentials and everything was in order. And at that time, I submitted an application to the Omaha Public Schools for this particular project. And since I wasn't part of OSCA at the time, and I wasn't part of Sicula Italia Foundation, I wrote at the bottom my signature and the logo for Carlentini Omaha Association. They wrote back to me. I had no idea that this was coming back, but it was a contract from their lawyers. And it said Carlentini Omaha Association on it. That was not a nonprofit here in Omaha. So I immediately turned to a lawyer friend, the one who started our Sicula Italia Foundation, and asked, can we put together a nonprofit right now in order to complete this this trip, this tour, this first ever exchange with youth here in Omaha from Carlentini? And he said, yes, we can. And we established Carlentini Omaha Association, USA Inc., and that is a nonprofit here.
Oh, that's great. So did have the kids from Omaha, have they gone to Carlentini?
I tried that. What was unique about this experience was within that week time frame, they not only observed the classroom, but they stayed in Little Italy in a Airbnb. So they all stayed in one house. There were 9 students and 4 chaperones, and 2 of the 4 chaperones were parents of 3 of the kids. There was a set of twins in there. And then the vice principal that came was also a cousin of one of the adults that was a chaperone of the parents. So there's so much familiar, family connection there that, that was just kind of part of this whole exchange as well, is that families that close. We're all that closely related. Within that time frame of a week, I had the kids going to the Omaha Zoo. They went to the Durham Western Heritage Museum. They went to all these places. And within that week, they also had a soccer game that was scheduled. So I contacted kids in Omaha who had ancestral connections to Carlentini as well, and their families. And those kids from Carlentini played with kids from Omaha on the same soccer team against kids from South Omaha who are primarily of Hispanic descent. And during the course of that game that happened, the kids all spoke the same language. They all spoke Spanish. I had no idea that kids from Carlentini and kids from Omaha would all be speaking a whole different language other than English or Italian. Getting kids to go out there, I found to be extremely difficult. I contacted Roselle and Gianca, asked them for a quote for, a plan that would give them a tour around Sicily. I found that to be an important piece, that there would need to be a tour included in their visit to Carlentini. And it was reasonably priced. However, I also required that any parent would need to go with their child. I would be there, but it was not going to be a nonprofit event. This was something that was going to be more of a family event. And I could not get parents to go. And it was a struggle. And it was, it's something that I would like to find funds to make sure that we can do this back and forth. But I found it to be difficult to get kids from Omaha out there. There's high school exchanges, but not elementary school.
It's sad that we don't have enough of that. I mean, my club here, I think last year we had 1 get the scholarship from an IAF, and I think this year we have 2 going, but they're at college.
Right, they're college, and then there's high school exchanges, but there's nothing at the elementary school level where that impression of where should I go for high school and maybe incorporate a high school exchange might be something that grows and they might want to have that option. This exposure.
I know there's a few groups that send some kids here and there, but there are other cultures like
Germans,
the Jewish. They send kids. It's over 100,000 they've sent over the course of the years, and we just don't do that. It's sad that we don't have enough of that kind of stuff, because the reason I do this is I don't want to lose our culture and our heritage.
Yes, but this is adults, and how do you get the message across to kids. Well, kids are so impressionable, and the impression that was left on them, they loved Omaha. Usually kids from foreign countries only want to visit New York or California. And this opened them up to a whole new place that they didn't really realize existed, even though so many of their families came here. You know, their own ancestors came here. They didn't realize that there was such a connection. So it opened their eyes. And I think we need to do more of that, at least between Omaha and Carlentini, the sister cities, and make that a reality for these young students. It's important. It's important to cultivate that at an early age and leave that impression on them so that they understand the importance.
Well, and I mean, we never went when we were kids. I mean, we've gone now the last few years. We've gone, 3 times to different places in Italy. I mean, if I had known what I know now, 20 years ago, I'd have a house there, or I'd have something there.
You're right.
Because we love. I mean, my daughter and her fiance, they're saying that they want to live there for a year, and I'm like, it's not that simple. It's not as easy as just saying, well, I'm going to go live there for a year. I told them, I said, we could go live there for a year because we don't have to work, but you go in there and live there for a year.
Unless they're working digitally, then there's a possibility. And that was one thing that when I was writing this application, and, I had been talking to my cousin Nuccio for a number of years already. He's the one that helped me connect with my cousin Bruno Monaco, who actually put the event together for our marriage to be blessed in Carlentini. It was just one of those things where I thought to myself, this is something that our youth need to know. And there's no borders anymore with our digital world, there's everything's accessible. Air flights, we can get to another country with, with ease, usually. And then, we can develop relationships through Zoom and Pen Pal and any other kind of means and platforms between schools. And at one time there were 6 schools here in Omaha that were pen pal with the 2 schools in Carlentini, and that's still
nice.
and ongoing as well.
Well, my daughter's a nurse. I just saw a thing that they I don't know, they're looking for people to go work there. So
is she thinking about it? Is she considering?
They're talking about it. I don't know if they'll ever do it. He's because when we were there, he drives a truck, and he was saying, I don't see any big trucks. I said, well, you don't see any big trucks because they can't get into the little towns.
True.
I said they have to stop outside of town and then offload whatever. So on our way back, we were on the highway, and I was taking pictures of big trucks. See, they have big trucks.
They do somewhere.
Yeah.
On the autostrada.
Yeah, exactly. We actually. Then, like I said, we were someplace, and you could see where the big trucks would pull in, and then they had to put the stuff on smaller trucks, and then probably even had to go smaller trucks to get into some of the smaller towns, I would think. But everything over there, they're not shipping things from all around the world like we are either. Like food and stuff like that. They're pretty much self-sufficient, and it's healthy food. It's not the crap we get here.
Absolutely. This is so true. Well, in 2012 is when my sister went to Italy, and she went to Rome for beatification of her saint from the church that she attends in Lincoln. Can't think of it at the moment. And then she took the train to Carlentini, and she came back and she looked at me and she says, you need to go to Italy. I'm like, I have kids in high school. The high school costs a lot of money in Omaha. I said, that's not on my radar. And then it was in 2014, my brother went with his fiance at the time, and he came back, said the same thing to me. I said, you guys are nuts. I'm not just getting up and going to a foreign country right now. And then Grandpa died. I bought the house, and I felt the need. I felt the pull. When I came back in 2017, I looked at my mom and her sister, my Aunt Mary, and I said, you guys need to go.
Yeah.
And they did. They went in 2019. Mom passed away in 2021. I know it was something she needed before she left.
Well, we went the first time. My son he was only a year old. We lived in England for 2 years because I worked for Chase, and so it was nothing to get there from England. It was 2 hours, but I didn't know what I know now. So we just went to Rome for a few days, and then we went to Sorrento for a week. And yeah, back then I would drive around. We drove to Pompeii and a few places like that. But I didn't know at the time that, now this was 30 years ago. So my father's first cousins were in their 60s living in Torre del Greco. And my father told me once that he had family in Torre del Greco. And that was it. I didn't think about it. We saw the sign, Torre del Greco near Naples, but that was that.
Wow.
And then we were supposed to go for COVID, just before COVID. That we were supposed to go that April. COVID hit in March. We were supposed to go in April.
Wow.
But
Thank goodness you weren't stuck out there.
No, I know. But there was a blessing in disguise, because when we did go, just before we went, my father's half first cousin, because he's younger than me, but he's a half, because my great grandfather, he was 60 and he married a woman who was 30. And because my great grandmother passed away when she was 42.
Wow.
So Nicola's, his mother was one of the siblings, or one of the daughters of the second marriage. He contacted me and he said, I know you're coming, and I'm going to meet you for lunch. And he took us to the cemetery. And then he didn't tell us where we were going after that. And he took us to meet my father's first cousins. Their father was 18 years younger than my grandmother. So almost a generation, right?
Yes.
And they had my parents' wedding photo from 1944 that my grandmother had said. And they were in contact with these people, and nobody ever said anything.
No. We didn't, but did you ever ask? I didn't ask. Really.
No, I didn't ask, because I didn't think to ask, to your point, And my mother's mother, I used to sit there and play cards with her all the time. I never asked her either. But, my father's his two sisters and one older brother, they were all born in Italy. And my godmother was probably about 7 or 8, I guess, 6, 7 or 8 or something like that when she came here. Nobody ever said, we got tons of family over there. My mother's family, not so much. My father's family, only my grandmother and her aunt came. Everybody else stayed there because they had money and they had status and everything like that. So they didn't need to come. And I still don't know why my grandmother came. But I was like, gee, how come nobody told me any of this stuff?
It's overwhelming in a good way. Like it's this realization, like I wish I'd known sooner. And I really want my kids to know this. I'm looking at everything, all these family connections from the viewpoint of my grandfather. So when I'm, talking to relatives over in Carlentini, I'm talking to my grandfather's first cousins. Remarkable, because he, on his father, his father's father, it was my great grandfather. It was Gaetano Ruma. Gaetano had married twice. So a lot of my grandfather's, just like your situation, a lot of my grandfather's cousins were a lot younger, and they were half cousins on that side, but they never called them half cousins. It wasn't. I started researching for my brother. When he came back, he wanted dual citizenship. And at that time, it was a piece of cake. And in 2020, when we were all shut down, my mom calls me and says, your brother needs help. I knew that meant finish it for him. He's not going to finish it. So I helped my mom get all the paperwork together. And I think it was, by the time everything was gathered and put together, it was 2021. It was still COVID. So we had a copy of the naturalization paper for my grandpa, Salvatore Ruma, and we didn't have to send the actual one. We sent a copy in. We were lucky. He just got his dual citizenship last year in August, right around the time of the Santa Lucia Festival. I told him it was a sign. It was a sign from Mom.
Yeah.
And then his kids got it.
Yeah, I have all the papers. I can't do it through my father, which is nuts, but I can do it through my mother. I have all this stuff, but now they made it so hard. But now my kids aren't eligible anymore. So it's like, if they're not eligible, what's the point? I'm 74. I don't need it, but I wanted them to have it more than anything else. But what really irked me more than anything else about the whole citizenship is that they just gave Maria Bartiromo citizenship for special merit.
What?
Yeah, and it because supposedly she did so. Nothing against her. But supposedly she did, stuff for Italians. And I'm like, yeah, well, there's lots of us that are doing stuff for
Yeah.
Italian heritage and stuff like that. And we're struggling. And some people were this close and they got kicked out.
I'm there. My application is sitting in Chicago and has not been approved. And my brother and his kids have been approved.
Yeah,
Mine's just
crazy.
sitting there.
I have nothing else to do anyway, so I'm crazy about this. She hasn't answered me yet, but I met somebody from the consulate in New York the other day, and I sent her, she gave me her email. She said, well, send me an email. So I sent her an email, explaining the situation. And I said, four of my grandparents were born in Italy. My mother's family, they never naturalized. I said, my paternal grandmother's mother is Caracciolo. I could trace directly back to the first Caracciolo in Naples in 950 AD.
And that's the information you were discussing with us in our Zoom, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Got it.
So I sent that to her. And I said, nobody's more Italian than me.
No, that is so true. And the importance of it is to not only for posterity and keeping that connection, but it could potentially help their economic growth in the future, right?
I was saying a couple of years ago, they should be making it easier for Americans because we'll go there more often. We'll move there. We'll buy stuff there.
Yep.
And
somebody's got to convince these people that they need to reverse it quick.
Yeah.
And I've been in communication with some people who have said, hang tight. And I'm like, okay, but I can't hang on forever. I'm not going to.
Well, that's like me too. Yeah.
I'm just not going to wish upon a star on it. But it's in the back of my mind that maybe some of these will be changed. Maybe some of these are coming down the pike here.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
And if they get changed back, make sure you got all your paperwork ready to go.
I have everything. So before we go, if anybody wants to learn more about the Sister City thing or Carlentini Association or just anything in general, how would they get in touch with you on that?
They can find my information on LinkedIn, Sherry Kanger. My email is skanger@gmail.com or info@Carlentini Omaha Association.
All right. Well, great. Well, thanks for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Robert. This was great.